We're going to start in about 30 seconds or so. On commence en 30 secondes. Bonjour, bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Mon nom est Jean-Marc Mangin. Je suis le président et directeur général de Fondation Philanthropique Canada. Le webinaire aujourd'hui sera en anglais et en français. Donc, si vous avez besoin de traduction, il y a le petit bouton à droite, interprétation, que vous devez peser. So the webinar today will be in French and English. And if you need translation at any time, just press the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. The session is being recorded so that we can share on our YouTube channel and on the website, and for members who could not make it today. Your face are not seen, of course, but anything you put in the chat could be visible. But I invite everyone, if you feel comfortable, to just introduce yourself in the chat so people have a sense of the coast-to-coast audience that we have today. There's already nearly 70 people that are in the call. We expect about 100 participants today, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And so obviously we're here today to talk about the DQ. We have 3 members of the working group that was established by the board to work and develop a position. So we're going to go over the process, over the position itself, and the reasons for the position, and the evidence behind some of the elements for the position. So, but before I do so, I'd like to make a Leanne acknowledgement. So as president and CEO of PFC, I feel it's especially important to recognize the many territories of Turtle Island on which we all live, and to acknowledge the continuing Indigenous presence and land rights. I'm speaking from Montreal today, on the traditional territory of the Kaneakee, which has long been served as a site of meeting and exchange for many Indigenous people, including the Kaneakee of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron, Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabeg. As a settler with Métis ancestry, I make it my professional and personal responsibility to better understand the history and legacy of colonialism. Reconciliation requires action, so I strive to ensure that my work, but also that of PFC, help us move together towards a more just future. So on that note, I'd like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Leanne.
Thank you. My name is Leanne Burton. I am the Director of Partnership Development with Make Way. For those who don't know, we're a public foundation that functions as an intermediary in the pursuit of social, environmental, and economic justice. I've also just completed a master's degree in philanthropy with Carleton University, which has led me to serving on the policy committee as well as the working group with PFC. And I look forward to the discussion.
Merci, Leanne. MG.
Thanks, John Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is MJ Sinha. I'm a first-generation settler from India, and I call Toronto home now for the last many years. I sit on the board of Philanthropic Foundations Canada, as well as the working group on Disbursement Quota, through my role on the board of the Helder League Foundation, a Toronto-based foundation focused on enhancing food and media literacy to children. My educational background is in engineering and business, and for more than a decade now, I've worked at the intersection of investments and social change. So in the field of impact investing, starting with working in India, work in Latin America, Western Europe, and now North America, where for the last many years, my work has focused primarily on assisting foundations on their investment strategies. And right now I work as a consultant advising some of the leading foundations in Canada on their impact and responsible investment. Looking forward to the conversation today, and thank you for everyone who's joining us for the discussion.
Merci. Et Jean-Marc?
Oui, bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Je suis Jean-Marc Chouinard, président de la Fondation Lucie André Chagnon and president of Lucie and André Chagnon Foundation, based in Montreal and in Quebec. I've been in philanthropy since close to 21 years actually already. Recently sitting also on the board of PFC and on the policy committee, and had the privilege to work with a great team recently on that working group around the DQ issue. Thank you, and really a pleasure to see you all.
Merci. Les autres membres du comité sont Rachel Renaud et Justin Wiebe, qui ont également participé au travail du comité. Ce comité s'est rencontré à 20 reprises pour des sessions souvent de 3 heures depuis le mois de mars. Donc, c'était un travail de longue haleine, de consultation avec nos partenaires dans le secteur, avec des experts du milieu philanthropique, du milieu de la finance. Donc, so there's been a lot of work behind the position that's been developed by PFC, and also the most extensive consultation that we've ever undertaken as an organization, through surveys, through a focus group, through a series of webinars, through one-on-one interviews. And we have we're able to get the majority of our members to be able to participate in one of these sessions to develop the position, which is, as Jean-Marc will explain in a second, new ground for PFC, and it will be a stretch for many of PFC members. So on that note, Jean-Marc, I'll turn it over to you to outline what the position is all about.
Oui, merci Jean-Marc. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Maybe first, just like outlined Jean-Marc just a few seconds ago, I would like to thank all the people who took part in that very important process, stakeholders, partners, organizations from the sector, researchers, individuals, of course, colleagues of other foundation networks, and of course, PFC members. Maybe quickly, just maybe a quick opening remark. The conversation today for us goes far beyond the very specific question of the DQ. I think the way we took as a group and as PFC took it as a reflection on more global questions around the optimal contribution of philanthropic community on the short and long term, the multiple and very singular contribution of philanthropy can have also to the common good, and different practices of philanthropy and its acknowledged role in the Canadian social fabric. Then DQ is one piece of the puzzle. In that perspective, I would also probably submit that the way we see the work done till now and the conversation today is more like a start in setting ourselves on the move, beginning of a dialogue to be maintained between the community and the nonprofit sector, the philanthropic community, of course, research and decision makers, looking forward to see how we can look at our practices as a tool for change, and how the framework and the environment that facilitates and enabling those objectives can be also positive in that perspective. Then Jean-Marc, you went through quickly the process. For the working group, I would maybe just quickly add that we had, in some ways, also in those 20 meetings, received also or hosted partners, community leaders, legal, academics, and other experts as well, just to outline this. Then general content on the position of PFC. First, like I've said, maybe just to be very clear on the DQ definition, as you most already know, but still, DQ is, of course, the minimum amount as a percentage of assets that charities must spend or grant each year. I will say it right at the start and come back a bit later on it. PFC endorses a DQ increase. Like I've said, DQ is only a part of the puzzle, one piece of the puzzle of philanthropic contribution. Then the big question we tried to find ways to answer in that same process was, how can foundations fulfill fully their mission and better serve the common good, both now and in the future? Then in that perspective, in the work we've done, PFC feels very strongly that the actual regulatory framework governing the charitable sector, as you most probably already know, is in need of modernizing to help our sector to be really on the road for more equitable and increased impact. That's why we've recommended to introduce a policy reform on specific initiatives. And actually it's a package. We have to see this really as a whole, a package of 3 specific enabling conditions and the one more specific measure on the DQ increase. And of course, if it's a package, if it's a whole, they're all intimately interdependent. Then the first enabling condition is around why are we all doing this? And essentially the answer around this is essentially for equity and to who is eligible to receive support. Or saying in other ways, improving equity and the one who have access to those charitable resources. Then essentially, we will go a bit further down that enabling condition in a few minutes, but essentially to see how we can, of course, review the actual rule around non-qualified donees more specifically. Second, around the different tools of philanthropy, of course, there's the spending or the giving, the grants, but what else can be done? And the second enabling condition is really to see how we can put the capital at use, our assets, all our assets at use. Then putting more charitable assets to work for common good is the essential objective of the second enabling condition. Trying to find ways to encourage, to ensure foundation can increase the way they align their capital to their values and to their missions. The third one is around more transparency and accountability and around data. The measure is essentially to see how we can really address the actual data deficit within and about the nonprofit and charitable sector. Either to, of course, have a better benchmarking, better capacity to analyze, but also giving us a capacity also to be really accountable for the work we're doing. And those are the 3 enabling conditions. Finally, on the specific, more specifically on the DQ, while probably the charitable sector and government could work on those conditions, we endorse a DQ increase to 5%. That increase would be accompanied by a periodic review of its impact every 5 years, guided by data and formula to continually ensure that we are not we're promoting equity in philanthropic contribution that is really at the threshold of, at the same way, have a better contribution, but also, of course, looking for a sustainability also in the different models of philanthropy that are at play. And also precluding also the accumulation of capital, where our missions are not capital accumulation. Our missions are around poverty, inequalities, environment, and others, then that formula would take that into account. And of course, we would see also that that period of time, the certain period of time of adaptation of foundations to get to that objective also could be at play with that recommendation. Then that's the four main measures that are in the position of PSC.
Merci, Jean-Marc. Also on the DQ per se, we recognize that it's a significant change for the sector, and there are issues around implementation. So we are also, you'll see in our submission, calling for a reasonable transition period towards the DQ regime, so we can make these adjustments, and so that the due diligence and the adjustment, the legal adjustment that have to be made, can be made in a reasonable fashion. On the point around responsible in impact investment and incentivizing that behavior, MG, can I ask you to go into more details why this is such an important enabling condition?
Thank you, Jean-Marc. Jean-Marc Chunat, for your starting and this question, Jean-Marc mentioned. So, just building up on what we've discussed, right? The idea has been, how do we unlock more of philanthropic capital for the service of the community that we are, we're all here for different, health, environmental, social reasons. And the disbursement quota, right now 3.5% or 5% is still going to be a part of, the overall impact a foundation can have. So just thinking about from a total, all our resources perspective is important. And there are, so with that context, there have been examples in the past where a foundation could, not any specific foundation, but generally, you think of Canada, it's a resource heavy country. You could focus on indigenous issues, and a lot of your resources might be on, oil and gas related to, or pipeline that are going through indigenous land. So kind of thinking that when you think about, supporting our end beneficiaries and the community, ensuring more of your assets are allocated. And so that's the context around, impact and responsible investing. So just because of the broader audience here, I'll just quickly explain what impact investing part is and what responsible investing would be. So impact investing, from our understanding, is basically the intersection where, social return and financial return are both intentional, and mostly these are in private investments. Think of things like renewable energy, fund focused on indigenous entrepreneurs, or clean tech, affordable housing, things like that. So again, makes a part of the investment portfolio. And responsible investing could be a few things. For organizations, it is, are you putting a negative screening on your investment? What are you not going to do? Are you going to put a positive screening? That are you going to focus on issues such as water or climate or clean tech? And so, a positive or negative screening. Adding another layer to it is focus on shareholder engagement. When you hold positions in, publicly listed companies, are you going to talk about issues that you care about? There was an example recently in Canada. A certain sports team changed its name to be more sensitive to indigenous communities, and some of the work was led by some philanthropic groups. And so I would say that's the context around unlocking all our assets so far as possible, ensuring that the money that is generating those returns actually aligns with our mission and vision, as not countering it. So that's the context around, impact and responsible investing and the definitions for it. And, just the focus has been that to be able to solve the problems that we are talking about, we need more resources. And just this conventional approach, has supported, but we need to think, beyond it. And again, I'm mindful that some of it, this is a new area for a lot of organizations, and that's why we have talked about, as a recommendation for the government to incentivize this work. A lot of foundations are partnering on things like these. It's, the recommendations from the Social Finance Task Force to put 10% into impact investing came 10 years back. So, we feel that it's time for, starting to kind of push the bar on this a little further and ask, work with our partner organizations to help unlock more resources. So I think I'll leave it at that as a higher level on, why the definition of it, why we talked about it, and some of the context that we are mindful that it's different than granting, but it helps unlock all the capital. Implementation is not something that conventionally all the foundations have the resource and capacity to do it. But, both as PFC and, or member organizations, this is something we think is going to help the sector, and we are willing and more than willing and interested in, working together and seeing how could this unlock more resources for issues we care about. So I'll stop at that.
Thanks, MJ. That's, in terms of putting all of our resources to work. We're going to be releasing an investment survey during the course of our conference in early November. The work that's done by a firm called Milani. And it shows that about 8% of the 93 foundations who participated in the survey are using their investment through either mission-related investment or impact-related investment. So we, after 10 years, we're not quite at 10% yet. And the question of how we can incentivize to at least range 10% and obviously do more. The other dimension that in terms of enabling condition is the data deficit. And I'm going to ask Leanne to explain what is the nature of the data deficit and what could be done to address it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, as both Jean-Marcs have mentioned already, we did a pretty good sort of 360 inquiry in the sector with community leaders, lawyers, academics, and data analysts. And we found significant challenges with the data that's available, particularly the primary data. We needed to know more about the nature of capital, both flowing in the sector and flowing out of the sector. So the best available primary data to use is what is captured through the T3010 that all foundations and charities have to submit annually. So what you can do is you can request this information. It is an open data forum. You request this information from the CRA, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, you get this massive email with 4 separate workbooks of raw data that you need someone who is skilled to aggregate and begin to try and pull out more information around the sector. But once the raw data is aggregated, we can gain a macro understanding of the sector. That is things like the number of foundations and assets and grants, but it's the micro analysis that becomes very challenging. So what we found was what Jean-Marc had just mentioned, which was what we're calling a data deficit. So we say that this data deficit is a function of 2 key elements. One is a lack of data, so there's missing data on the T3010, and then 2, poor data quality. So there's some inconsistencies with the data. So for example, as of 2018, we know that there were $92 billion in assets held by public and private foundations together, but we don't know how much of that is staffs, how much of it is endowment capital. We don't know how much is available for deployment today. A lot of that capital is likely bound by perpetuity and encroachment clauses. And the investments, to MJ's point earlier, this is a complex but critical analysis. What is the social return on investments in the 92 billion in assets? Is it net positive or is it net negative? And then also, we weren't able to tell how much funding flowed to qualified donees versus non-qualified donees. We also know that as of 2018, there were $7 billion in grants, but we don't know the communities where the funds were flowing, and we don't know the social gaps that were being filled or were not being filled. So while the individual foundations know, it's not public open data, and it's making it difficult to properly assess and analyze the state of the sector so that we can make good data-informed policy recommendations. Further, in my opinion, it's also dangerous to have incomplete and inaccurate data because it leaves the public to slice and dice existing information and make assumptions about the sector. So we found that the data is also unreliable. 20 to 30% of foundations are incorrectly completing their T3010 filings. So for example, common errors include confusing grants with expenses, and this one leads to an inaccurate understanding of even the disbursement rate. So in my opinion, our sector has outgrown this existing data capture. We need better data so we can produce a better shared understanding of our sector. It will inform better policy. It will allow us to capture longitudinal trends so that we can see how this sector is evolving in its service to the public over time. For a sector that represents 8% of our economy and assets totaling 92 billion, we have an incredibly limited understanding of the sector. And the working group determined that we should not pause on an increase in the disbursement quota now, but we also should set our sights as a collective philanthropic community down the line. So with improved data, we can have an appreciation of the current activities underway and identify sector gaps and develop pathways forward for an equitable future for all Canadians. So I'll just stop there and turn it back over to my colleagues.
Merci Leanne. Je vais inviter Jean-Marc à nous parler à nouveau des non-qualified donors and go into more detail of why it is a problem and what can be done about it and why it's linked to our overall position on DQ. Jean-Marc?
Well, merci, Jean-Marc. Well, in the course of that work, really pretty soon, the question around, the first thing that we thought needed to change is who is eligible to receive any support. The actual barriers that we are confronted as funders, but even more non-qualified donees, is important for several reasons. But looking at individual increase of the DQ, one of the unexpected probably effect would also be maybe to see more of the same, partly at least, organization just receiving more money. And for us, of course, with a strong principle around equity, like I said just a bit earlier, that situation for us was really paramount to see, to have that conversation around an increase of the DQ. As you know, and like I've said, we're probably all confronted to this. We built relationships with communities and with different type of movements, collaborations, that for different kind of reason have been historically or persistently underfunded and excluded from receiving greater access to resources and to charitable spending. Then essentially, you know, it makes just no sense in the way that we are really working to see those key players, key stakeholders have a say and have action and being supportive of their vision to create change, social change or environmental change. Then the present rule prevents this. As you know, the present rule also require in some type of relationship based on something called direction and control. That creates certainly also a certain type of relationship that we don't really think is proper to the type of trust relationship we try to build on a medium long-term with those stakeholders. For all those reasons, finding a way to create a policy level playing field between all nonprofits, all those who are carrying out charitable activities, charitable outcomes, but do not have actually charitable status, for us seems really, really key to, even if we had no, of course, increase of the DQ, but even more if there's an increase of the DQ. That situation was already explained and by the Senate and other instances to see that change happen. And for us, it was really important to underline that one of the key reasons why we're all doing this work was to see eventually a change on that perspective. Merci, Jean-Marc.
Merci, Jean-Marc. So I'm going to invite participants, with nearly 100 people, to put their question in the Q&A. We're going to move to that question period relatively soon. But before we do so, anything else as for the panelists would like to add, or any new thoughts have been triggered by the points that your fellow panelists have raised over the last 20 minutes?
I think I'll just piggyback on what Jean-Marc Chunit said about the our overall discussion on non-qualified donees, right? I think that also came so much further during last, I'm based out of Toronto, I have a donor advised fund with my partner at the Toronto Foundation, get a lot of updates from there, and seeing a lot of great work has been happening with very grassroots communities and community-led organizations. So that balance of ensuring, the CRA, has obviously the necessary check and balance and everything, but just kind of piggybacking on the significance of that part that, when we talk about furthering, like the whole purpose of this is increasing more flow in the community and supporting. But if we do not work on some of the structural, that came up in so many times in our discussions, right? Like if we do not work on the structural gaps that we have noticed or that have magnified in last 2 years, but have been existing, then it's going to be more capital in the status quo approach. And again, not saying that necessarily is a bad thing, but point is it's not going to further the equity, fairness, justice part that we have been talking about. And so that's why I would say that the impact of COVID in last 2 years and the increased visibility on the role grassroots on-ground organizations have played, and are we going to support them in the way we can, or is the focus and or they have to otherwise have this the administrative burden of registration and this and that. So let's finding ways on furthering our impact through our partners. So I just want to double down that that's something that is worth reflecting, especially thinking in different communities across the country, the organizations that have stepped up to support, and what can we do as a sector to assess that. So just wanted to emphasize further on that point. Thank you.
I can jump in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
And thank you, MJ, for bringing up the concepts of equity enabling philanthropy, because that's something that I think needs to be embodied in the sector. And I'm not sure that the endowment model, which is sort of the mainstream primary model for philanthropy, I'm not sure that that is going to enable equity for Canadians in the future. And we're about to see a tremendous intergenerational wealth transfer in the next 10 years. And that means a larger contribution into the charitable sector. And so we need to have better data to understand where we are, and so that we can set benchmarks for alternative models for philanthropy in the future, and more inclusion and more representation at policy tables, at board tables, in leadership. And then I really think with those diverse perspectives, the rest will follow, the innovation will come, and the creativity and the service to the public sector will increase.
Thanks, Leanne. For those interested, there's a whole section about the T3010 in our submission, how to improve it, including better data around diversity around the board table for the sector as a whole, not only for foundation. Let's move to the Q&A section of the session. And a first question to be expected, why, PFC is calling for an increase, but why 5%? There's some voices, Mark Bloomberg, the Ontario Not-for-Profit Network, that are calling for a much higher increase to 10%. The Conservative Party of Canada in the last election called for 7.5%. So why did we land it at 5? On the other end, we also had other voices that signal 5%. That's a stretch that could lead to encroaching capital. So why 5%?
I can try this one. Well, first, we tried to focus on whatever data was available to go in that direction. And one principle was the diversity of foundations models. Like Leanne just brought up a bit earlier, we encourage spend out models, but we also believe that long-term sustainable models to work on wicked issues and being there for long term are also, of course, of value. That in that perspective, the first data that we used was essentially results of the comfort of membership around any type of increase. And basically, if my memory is okay today, I think 73% of membership or close to were seeing a 4.5 really sustainable, something like 57% of membership thought that 5% was sustainable. And I think it was around 17% or close that thought that 7% was sustainable. And then that was the first piece of data. The second piece was around sensitivity analysis of capital use on a long-term basis, 10, 15 to 20 years from now. And we had different type of models presented by specific foundations or also supported by analysis done by external consultants. And finally, recently, I think it was around 6 months ago, the Council of Foundations of Michigan came out with a report essentially nailing back the number around 5% being something that is sustainable in the long term. Then having all those information, looking at all type of scenarios, we thought first that it was important to stuck our neck out. And secondly, after having that discussion, we thought that the 5% actually with the data we have is the threshold between being really significantly contributing to the short-term issues, but also preserving sustainability model foundations. Then that was essentially the rationale behind that choice.
The other panelists, do you want to add anything? The 5%?
I could make just a quick comment. I mean, agreed to what John McShun had said. And one part was, we talk about the TSX returns and those pieces, right? I mean, traditionally, some of my work has taken me across the world. And I think traditionally, Canadian investors, our foundations including, are not the most, risk, are sometimes risk averse in the politest way. So the 60-40 model of equities and fixed income mix of it is still reasonably prevalent. So when we just look at even just one data point about the TSX, it's not like all the foundations are putting 100% of their portfolio into international equities that are generating 12-14% return. And the other thing is, if independent of what happens, say when the market falls during COVID or other situations, organizations have both a structural, legal, and moral, obligation to continue to support the work that they are supporting. So just kind of, sometimes just looking data and number, there was a point, depending on which point you pick things up on, there was a point in 2018, if you looked up to the TSX return, it was flat for the last 10 years. So there are more context and nuances around that, even just the return part. And on the model part, I remember, not going into specific name, I remember one of my work took me to a particular community. I read about a particular community foundation that got gifted like a $2 or $3 million gift by someone who was very passionate about, animal rights and cruelty against animal, preventing cruelty against animal. And I was just going through some of that, and the question was, they thought, you know what, they don't think this issue is going to get solved, unfortunately, right away. So they would rather put this, $2 million, $2.5 million, and have like $100,000 come in every year. So there are some problems that need immediate support, but does everything apply for that? And the other part is, does every organization have the capacity to take up more capital? Because giving more resources, if it's not structured and thoughtful and mindful, then just putting more money is actually not going to serve the purpose. So I think we've all been like, hey, that's why we talked about impact investing and responsible investing. Let's try to deploy more, but that should again come with thoughtfulness and structure and planning. So just to say, being mindful of TSX returns or any of those numbers to be taken in context, and then doubling down on what John McShunett said is, different models do have a different role to play. As much as we encourage more deployment, there is going to be different needs for different models. So just wanted to add those pieces.
Thanks, MJ. Leanne, anything to add?
On the investment side?
On the 5%, right? On the initial question, landing on 5%, and the balance between spend down and perpetuity foundation that want to be engaged, as MJ just said, over a very long term.
I guess I don't have a comment specifically on the number recommended by a PFC, but I would love to see a more inclusive, safe dialogue in the sector where funders and communities can come together and truly share how philanthropy is playing out for them from their perspective in the community or in their institution, because we may all have well-meaning intentions, but it might not be landing on the ground in a way that benefits community. I think that we're all really in this together, and we should really approach this in a trust-based collaborative way. And this is a really great opportunity, I think, in this sector to really engage in meaningful dialogue and inclusive policy reform. Thanks.
We are getting question on the different elements of the enabling condition. So there's one on the non-qualified donatees. We'll start with that one. By a unanimous attendee. If there's a concern that good organizations are not charities, why don't foundations help them become charities? That way, they are subject to rules about accountability and transparency, something that will be difficult to do with non-qualified donees. Who wants to get started in answering this question?
As an intermediary, I could get us started, but I don't think that I'm the expert here. But there is a lot of that happening in the intermediary world. Makeway has a shared platform, which is an administrative home for charitable projects to do their work out in the field, but not worry about the administration on the back end. Because a lot of times, navigating the regulatory landscape of the Canadian charitable sector is extremely onerous and requires specialty skill sets. And so change makers out in the field are not necessarily skilled in that area, nor do they want to be. And oftentimes they're running on shoestring budgets. And I will also say something that we hear from the field as well too, especially our friends in Indigenous communities, that they really don't want to operate inside the structure of the charitable sector. They really don't feel that the context that they're navigating right now should be considered charitable. It's really a human right. It's really something that needs to be addressed in other ways. So it's a little bit complex, I would say, but I'm interested to hear what my colleagues here have to say about that.
I think the suggestion is one, but lots of us are already navigating, like you said, Leanne, with some partners to make sense and still being supportive of the action. Then why not navigate around when we could do it clearly? We believe also that the accountability part can also be feasible in another set of rules than the one that we know today. And for the other reason that you just mentioned, Leanne, I think some populations, but also some type of initiatives will never really be comfortable to be in that type of regime. Then for all those reasons, it's right to try to find ways during the actual way of playing, but I think we're just navigating around instead of being clear. And yeah.
Merci. We'll move on to another question that's brought from Alice and Lou. I'll combine the two in terms of, do you have an idea of the cost and time frame to secure the necessary data? And what's the role of StatsCan? The T3010 involves CRA. What's the role of StatsCan? Est-ce que Statistics Canada devrait jouer un rôle dans la collecte des données sur le secteur philanthropique?
I could just say both of those are very good questions, and I think they're questions that this group is not in a position to be able to answer. We can make recommendations around the importance of this issue of the data deficit being tackled and to inform good public policy, but how that plays out, we're not completely sure yet. The CRA might say this is way beyond our scope, and the StatsCan might say, well, this is not the kind of data that we're looking to gather. I think if I might be so bold as to suggest that if there were a really solid home at the federal government for the charitable sector, then we might be able to break down some of these silos and pull together a really meaningful way of capturing the unique elements of this charitable sector. So how it's going to play out, I don't know, but I'm interested to hear what Jean-Marc has to say. I see you're off mute.
Yeah, well, I was about to go in the same direction, Leanne, and maybe before the home, maybe there's an opportunity just to have conversation with interdepartmental conversation on some of the issues on the broader agenda that we're bringing now. And that implies, of course, agencies like Statistics Canada, but other departments. And for the phasing in some way of that data work, I think there's probably low-hanging fruit. We would have in that conversation to have a sort of a game plan, and I think there's low-hanging fruits, and some of them are a bit tougher to build. But I think that would be the next step. We did not go that deep to try to give a perimeter of the resources that it would take to go in that direction yet.
So I'm inviting people to put their question in the Q&A. It's a bit easier for me to track as opposed to in the chat, but I'll try my best to follow in the chat as well. The next questions are regarding the investment and tracking of investments. What does PFC think that it's a good idea to require foundation to report on all of their investments?
I can take a stab at this and have my panelists join on the comment. I think one part, as we talked about, the whole context around this is helping allow more assets to two pieces, I'll say. One is helping unlock more capital for a purpose, and then second part is the data. Right now, we can pick a statistic about I just talked about TSX return, but doesn't mean what it's a piece of information. What's the analysis around it? What does it actually mean? So I think there is a saying in impact measurement that, or broadly, what doesn't measure doesn't matter. So how are you going to do something about something if you do not have, I often say, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So I feel this information is going to could be short-term, additional work for sure. But I think on a long-term perspective, it's going to help us steer around, what are we doing with all our assets? It's as someone who's been a CFO, Chief Finance and Investment Officer role as a consultant and otherwise, when I look at my job and I speak for most of my colleagues, is it's a big responsibility. Are we able to further the missions that we were created for? Is our money going towards that purpose? So the starting point around understanding what's happening with the money is important to understand what are we furthering the purpose or not? And the other part, are we negating the purpose? And then it also helps again, I'm not going to open a Pandora's box. What I'm saying is, right now we're talking about a disbursement quota as a generic baseline. In future, could more data allow to the sector to be more contextual around different foundation structures and their operating. I know, for example, in India, it's about X% of your return has to be given away every year. It's not about the assets. So I think that would be my 2 points, that more data is going to help us see where the capital is going, whether it's supporting or not, especially in line with talks about impact and responsible investment. And I think will help us kind of contextualize a nuance in the future around what could the evolution, so not only just thinking about today, but what does the evolution of this work look like, and the data would help in that. So that would be my response.
Yeah, I would also love to throw out a well-known saying as well to MJ's, which is all investments have impact. So they can have net positive impacts or net negative impacts. And by knowing more about where the investments are, we can have an understanding of whether those investments are actually not only undermining the mission of the foundation, but perhaps undermining the mission or the direction of the entire sector if the net negative impact is extremely high. And also there's opportunity to be able to mobilize all the tools in your toolkit as a foundation: grant making, networks and relationships, knowledge and skills, and then also the investments. That can be a tool in your toolkit as well too. And when we look at the 92 billion, we really don't know how much of that is invested for mission. And honestly, right now, it kind of looks like the sector is asset rich and cash poor. So that if we're able to know more about what's going on there, then I think we can celebrate the great things that are going on and set goals together around how to be more supportive to social equity outcomes.
I don't know if I will add really something, but in the mandate we have, there was maybe some kind of a frustrating part of it, in the fact that foundations and philanthropy is often seen as one line on a financial business case for a specific initiative, and that's it. And we know that spending is not enough, giving is not enough, giving the same way is not enough, and actually that does not reflect the actual contribution and of philanthropy wider. Then why not show it? And of course, like Leanne and MJ said, well, also in a spirit of exemplarity, see how we can progress towards a more aligned action towards our values and our mission.
Thanks. Well, we'll go back to the question on unqualified donor in a second, because the attendee did not believe we answered his question or her question. But there's another question on impact investment and relationship with investment. And the question is as follows: are there any concern that the increased disbursement quota might discourage impact investments that may have a high social or environmental return, but a lower financial one?
I'll try to answer that too, and then have my colleagues join. Great question, and I think I'll preface that with saying it's a great question, and I think there is often a feeling that impact investment is generates lower than market return. But I think looking at deals from a portfolio perspective, just like your overall portfolio is structured instead of a deal by deal. And I have personally, through my different roles, led investment, including some of them that I've been leading right now for a prominent community foundation, where it's a mix of some deals could be like a 3 or 4, 5% return, others are like 11%. So I feel taking some of those strengths of traditional portfolio structuring and traditional investment structuring and bringing it onto impact investing and being like, hey, you know what, overall we have this $100 million $100 on us, and we hope to unlock more towards impact, towards the causes we care about. X percentage is what we return. We are hoping this Y percentage is going to come through our, public market, and taking and from there taking a portfolio approach that, a risk return impact balancing. So I would say, yes, on top of it, to begin with, one could feel that there is that opinion. I wouldn't say opinion. Often people are get worried that is it going to reduce, returns. But I have done deals and structured portfolios that end up generating returns that meet the target. With increased disbursement quota, obviously it will be a bit of challenge. But the question that I'll say is it's going to be a bit difficult. But as Leanne said, that every dollar has its impact. Positive, negative, neutral. So it's going to be a bit of difficult conversation and difficult to operationalize for any organization that hasn't done it. But is it important? Is it something we care about? Are we interested in, are we willing to put more resources? So that's, I'll sum it up by saying, and I appreciate what was said. I think it's taking it more on a very structural approach, on a portfolio basis, and bringing the same rigor as your traditional portfolio into impact what I have seen has the ability to allow you to generate rate of returns that will meet your target. Yes, with increased disbursement quota, it might be a bit more challenge, but I think it's still worth exploring and pursuing further. So that would be my take.
Anybody else anything to add? One of the surprising things that I learned through this process is the actually evidence on impact investment returns actually quite mixed, and there's a significant amount of impact investment have actually quite good returns. But it's often in very long term where you, in investment where you need to be patient. So the impact on liquidity might be significant as opposed to the returns. And it's one of the reasons for the periodic review is actually look at the full picture of investment portfolios, the returns, the liquidity, and the ability to do the grants properly. Let's go back to the question around non-qualified donees. As I mentioned, the attendee did not believe we answered his question. Are we not concerned with accountability and transparency if non-qualified donees are treated like charities? So how do we maintain accountability and transparency if there's a level playing field between what we have now in non-qualified donees and qualified donees, charities? Who wants to get started?
I can just say something out of the gates. The way that it's happening right now, it's not transparent at all. So foundations can grant to non-qualified donees now, but they would do it through a services agreement or through like a contract partnership or contract employment. And so that's kind of buried right now in the expenses side of T3010 filings. And we can't actually pull that out to find out how much existing money is actually going to non-qualified donees. So while I don't have the answer here, I do think that there's some inquiry to do and some work here around what kind of transparency are we looking for? To what degree do we need to monitor and have direction and control over community-led change? The more that we have, the less that those community leaders are able to do out in the field. So I'll just leave it there from my perspective.
Anything to add on this aspect? I mean, they are a growing set of experience about working with non-qualified donees.
Yeah. I totally agree with Leanne. I know that some of the foundations on the call today, as we are, have close to 60–70% of their portfolio of grants that are with non-qualified donees. And the situation that Leanne just described is just not appearing at all in the T3010. And that does not, I think we're all comfortable when we're doing that there's accountability and transparency in our bilateral agreements and with the specific foundations, but much less with the actual data sets that the T3010, as an example, is giving. Then I think there's, like Leanne said, there's certainly here something to go a bit deeper on what type of transparency are we expecting, and what would be the tools to get there. But I think it's feasible.
Thanks. Go ahead, Angie. Sorry.
If I just piggyback on what was said, I mean, my background is more of finance and investment, but something that often comes up, and I at least, value what I've learned is, two parts, right? That trust-based philanthropy is also one part. So that balance of, accountability in investments, when we do, Jean-Marc, you talked about those 10-year return, long-term investments. And we all say at the end of the day, I am the one who does the due diligence. At the end of the day, we're trusting people that they're going to see through what they are saying. So there is that balance of, when we talk about this trust-based philanthropy on the work that, I mean, if you think that, I'm not saying that was suggested. What I'm saying is, if someone believes that, a microscopic control is going to actually lead to a result, then that, in my personal opinion, by the way, I don't think that's a great relation to begin with. So I would say, that focus on some things that I have learned through the philanthropic side of the trust-based philanthropy aspect, remembering that. And the second part is, as someone who's been a custodian of other people's wealth, there is such a power imbalance, right? So some of this, our discussion is focusing on how we try to create a more level field in which, the organizations we are supporting, just because you write the check doesn't make you right, at least in my opinion. So that's our thing, that the balance of accountability and trust in using, just keeping those contexts in mind. And I know a Toronto-based foundation that focuses on youth, does a lot of pop-up grants. And I have read some of the stories, and the amazing impact these student-run or very youth-driven initiatives has had on some marginalized communities in the Toronto area. So it's good work happening. Some of it measurable, some of it notional or story. Both. Do these organizations have the resources or capacity, a 3 volunteer or a bunch of youth coming together to do something? So understanding, the same size will not fit all, and how can we reimagine some of the structures that are there to be able to assist the community? So that's, before I start going in circles and not making sense, I'll stop at that. But I think just those contexts behind that is something I think that I would believe that we should keep in mind.
I agree with you, MJ. Just because we've done it a certain way for so long does not necessarily mean that that's the best way for it to be done. And I would just say that our colleague Sarah just popped in our chat here that Bill 222 speaks to this. And if you're interested in this, follow along with Senator Ratna Omnivar's narrative on this, and you might even be able to influence that piece of work as well.
Treating not-for-profit that provide a public benefit doesn't mean there's no transparency or accountability. What system we put in place in that new regime. Let's move to the next question from Tim Broadhead. Did the committee discuss taxing capital gains, perhaps only on the portion of asset not devoted to impact investment, generated in the endowment? This could also incentivize impact investment.
I can take this one up too. Anything related to finance and investment part, but short answer is no. We talked about a bunch of different models that have happened across the world, but and my panelists correct me if I'm wrong, but no. The short answer is no. That's not the capital gain. That's the question. The structure of the question is something that we did not. We did look at different approaches across the world, but this particular piece is not something that was formed a part of our recommendation.
Yeah, I would say that that's outside of the scope of the working group, but it's these kinds of questions and ideas that I think really need to be brought forward. And I really appreciate how this is stated. It's a great idea.
Agreed.
the working group has come to an end with the submission that was provided to the government last week. The policy committee of PFC will continue its work. And this is one idea, as MG can raise, it was kind of in passing, but we didn't touch it in any kind of serious depth in terms of what would be the impact of that. So in conversation with the Finance Department of Government Canada, so how do you actually go about incentivizing this kind of investment without undermining the autonomy of foundation, without telling them exactly how to grant and exactly how to invest. So the autonomy is important, but it's one of the key principles. You'll see this in the submission. But the actual form of the incentivizing, that we did not settle on a specific recommendation to government. We had only went as far as reporting, make it as part of the reporting, and nudge behavior that way. But we didn't go further than that. There's a couple. There are more questions coming. I don't know if I have time to go through to everything, but there's another concern from Ted. Again, it touches on the issue of accountability. And not so much concerned about trusting recipient as trusting so-called philanthropists, self-dealing by giving money to sham community organization. This is where the real charity scandals have existed, and giving the new version of the Panama Papers that were just released a few days ago. Is this a real concern? And if so, what should be done about it? So that how do we ensure that the money actually goes to charitable purposes?
I mean, I would really defer to Bill S-222 on that one. I think there's been a lot more dedicated inquiry there around that, and all valid concerns, but I'm not able to offer anything substantive here. I do have some colleagues at Make Way that have pretty solid perspectives on this, and I wish I could just call them right now and bring forward their perspective.
Nothing to add beyond what Leanne said, but I agree that that the concern is totally valid, and I think that balance of operational and other freedom, but also ensuring with great power comes great responsibility, and it's not used. So that's a very valid question and concern, and both I think something that the other point on tax gain, which I talked about, as the evolution of the work happens on our end, the submission has been done, but evolution of work on the PFC end happens. I think these kind of issues to keep in mind, this is a great opportunity, just piggybacking what Leanne said, to hear, perspectives, such exciting perspectives, and factoring that. And for now, exactly the work the Senator is doing on S-222, I think would be a good place to provide feedback or opinions on, so that it's heard and factored in. But valid question, absolutely.
I'm going to combine a question in the chat and a question here in Q&A, and it's one, the reaction from government in the lead up to the consultation, and now that the submission that has been provided, the initial reaction from government, but also we asking government to act on these enabling conditions. Why can't foundation themselves act without government action? Donc, en français, comment maintenant s'assurer que les fondations vont intégrer les aménagements proposés en lien avec les objectifs de générer plus d'équité, de justice sociale et de justice environnementale? Comment s'assurer que le secteur devienne plus ouvert à l'enjeu global de la justice? So what's on us and what's on government? Jean-Marc?
Well, yeah, very, very good question. We had a couple of times good discussions around this. Like I've said a bit earlier, I think in my opening remark, in some ways, the work done triggered by that governmental interest, some would say sudden governmental interest on the DQ, is the start of a conversation and a start in setting ourselves on the move. And I think as foundations, we have to continue that dialogue, and eventually, like some of other initiatives, and I'm thinking about the initiatives in Quebec around la déclaration commune des fondations québécoises contre les inégalités. They've set some kind of principles and some type of objectives where foundation can sit in different position, but some type of a vision of the foundation responsibilities and some type of voluntary accountability that can be done by foundations to see how we progress as a group towards our global missions of being helpful for the common good, or more specific missions for every organization. Then I think some of this is maybe governmental. How can I say governmental? The role of government is really to create a facilitating, enabling environment. But after this, I think there's of course a lot of space for foundations, and I think PFC wants to continue in that direction to see how we can continue those conversations like today, to see as a group how we can all progress in that direction. Then I think there's place for that, and there's certainly a leadership role that can be played by foundation, and an exemplary role that can be played by foundations for offshore.
Merci.
Yeah, can I just add to that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to that because it brings up a memory. Susan Phillips of Carleton University wrote a report a few years ago called Dancing with Giraffes, I believe it was. And it was really about how much capacity foundations have to be shifting public policy and to be making social change happen. They have a lot more political and economic flexibility, and they're only accountable to themselves, whereas operating charities are accountable to a board. Of course, there's still board accountability, but it's a different dynamic. So yes, individual foundations, the 3.5%, that's a minimum, right? Like you can actually do a lot more than that if you like. And I think what I would just suggest is that all foundations, even those the ones that have been existing for a really long time, sit down with their family board and ask, why do we exist? For what purpose? And does our form match our function, right? And maybe it did at one point, and maybe it doesn't today. And maybe it's just time to check in there.
If I could quickly piggyback on that, what you just said, right? Like I think as a PFC group and this particular group, we have tried to be representative of the broader thoughts and, both for the membership and the community. But like something, this is a personal opinion of mine, is I feel, philanthropy could be that venture capital for social change, that risk capital for social change. So you don't have to stick with, we talked about what we are recommending is a floor, the minimum. So this could be your baseline, but what more you could do, and where philanthropy could actually take a more progressive, foundations on investments or other things or granting, which could shape the, demonstrate a pilot of, how differently things could be done. And so just to call it that, I think for this group, we have had that balance of, how do we speak to our membership and the broader communities, but also if, I think I've seen different organizations that have tried to reimagine the structures and the status quo and pave the path for a lot of organizations, how things could be done differently. So taking this as just the starting point to begin with, but not this is the floor, not the ceiling.
Thank you. This was actually a very good concluding comments by the members of the panel today. So unless you have absolutely another additional comment you want to make as a takeaway. I'll take this as a more the significant question that we should ask ourselves. Obviously, government is interested in our position, both in the lead up to the consultation, with a series of meetings that will now that after cabinet is appointed in a couple of weeks from now, we're going to be re-engaging government on this issue, but set in a kind of much broader reform agenda and modernization agenda for the sector, but not alone, in partnership with the other groups representing the charitable sector in Canada. So this is going to be an ongoing. This is only the beginning of the work. It's that the working group has done and helping the PFC define its position on the question. But the work actually only really starts now in terms of really engaging the government, our partners, and see what's doable in the short term, what's doable in the longer term, and in terms of improving the impact of philanthropy on the public good, which we're trying to do. I'm going to thank all three panelists for your not only for your participation today, but for all of your work over the last 7 months. Has been very impressive, and for our members on the call to not hesitate to be in touch with us if you have any questions or concerns. We'll be glad to answer them. We also have some for your board members or for your staff, a couple of shorter pieces. You don't have to read a full 20-page submission, but you could also. There's an op-ed in the Hill Times that was published a few days ago, and a piece in the Future of Good. And en français, nous avons également un blog qui est sur le site web de FPC. Donc sur ce, je vous souhaite tous une bonne journée et à très bientôt. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thanks.